So, have you ever tried versioning your APIs directly in the URL path? Like Von users or something?
Yeah, I've seen that. It seems straightforward but also a bit cumbersome to update URLs across all client apps.
Absolutely. It can be a pain. But it's so clear and explicit, right? No ambiguity about which version of the API is being used.
True, but what about when we need to deprecate old versions? Does that mean we just leave those endpoints around forever?
Well, ideally, you give clients plenty of notice before shutting down older versions. Like 6 months or a year. And then you can start redirecting them to newer versions.
That sounds logistically challenging. What if someone missed the memo and their app still relies on an outdated endpoint?
Then they're in for some troubleshooting sessions. But, honestly, that's part of the developer experience. You set expectations clearly and stick to them. Otherwise, you end up with a maintenance nightmare.
I guess it's better than having inconsistent behavior due to hidden version numbers elsewhere.
Exactly. Consistency is key here. Plus, putting the version in the URL makes it easy to switch between different environments, like staging versus production, without worrying about conflicting behaviors.
Makes sense. Though it does seem like a lot of work up front to manage these transitions smoothly.
It definitely requires planning and communication, but once you get the hang of it, it becomes pretty routine. Now, have you considered using media types for versioning instead? Speaking of alternatives, how do you feel about using query parameters for versioning? Something like users API version tool?
I've heard that can get messy quickly. What if the same endpoint needs multiple versions based on different features?
That's true. It can become cluttered. But it's flexible and doesn't require changing existing URLs. Plus, it's easier to implement initially compared to restructuring URL paths.
Flexibility sounds nice, but maintaining clarity could be tough with lots of parameters floating around.
Definitely a trade-off. It works well for smaller projects or when you want quick iterations without breaking existing integrations. However, for larger systems, it might lead to confusion down the line.
I see your point. The simplicity in implementation versus long-term maintainability.
Exactly. And let's not forget about documentation. With query parameters, making sure every possible combination is clearly documented becomes crucial.
Agreed. Documenting all potential combinations would be essential to avoid any misunderstandings.
Right. And from a security standpoint, visible version numbers in URLs could potentially expose more information than necessary. Query parameters might offer a slight edge there too.
That's an interesting angle. Keeping certain details less obvious could help reduce vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. So while query parameter versioning offers convenience and flexibility, it comes with its own set of challenges that need careful consideration. Another approach worth considering is header-based versioning. Using a custom KTPP header like accept version or XAPI version.
That sounds intriguing. How does that work exactly?
Instead of modifying the URL or adding query parameters, you specify the API version in a request header. For example, you could set XAPI version 2. This keeps your URLs clean and avoids clutter.
That does keep things neat. But how do you ensure everyone knows to use this header correctly?
Good question. Documentation becomes even more critical here. You need to clearly specify which headers are required and what values they should have. Plus, it helps if your API gateway can enforce these rules.
Ensuring proper usage through documentation and enforcement sounds important.
Absolutely. Header-based versioning also makes it easier to manage different versions without changing existing endpoints. It's cleaner and can be more scalable for large systems.
Cleanliness and scalability are definitely appealing features.
Indeed. And from a security perspective, since the version isn't visible in the URL, it adds another layer of obscurity, which can be beneficial.
That's a good point. Less exposure means fewer potential vulnerabilities.
Exactly. So while header-based versioning requires thorough documentation and possibly some setup on the server side, it offers a tidy solution for managing API versions without altering URLs or bloating query strings.
Seems like a balanced approach with its own set of benefits and considerations.
Precisely. Each method has its pros and cons, but understanding these nuances helps in choosing the right strategy based on specific project needs. Speaking of which, have you considered content negotiation with media types? Using something like accept application vnd.your API type.
That sounds sophisticated. How does that work in practice?
Essentially, you use the accept header to specify the desired media type and version. This allows clients to request a specific version of the resource without changing URLs or adding extra parameters.
That seems quite elegant. But wouldn't it require extensive documentation for all possible media types?
Yes, comprehensive documentation is key here. You need to clearly define each media type and its corresponding version so developers know exactly what to expect.
And how do you handle backward compatibility with this approach?
Good question. Content negotiation helps because you can return different representations of the same resource based on the requested media type. This way, older clients can continue using older versions while new ones can access updated formats.
That makes sense. It seems like a flexible yet robust solution.
Exactly. Plus, it aligns well with REST principles by leveraging HTTP capabilities for specifying resource representations. It's a bit more complex to set up initially, but pays off in terms of maintainability and flexibility.
The initial setup complexity might be daunting, but the long-term benefits sound significant.
Definitely. It requires some upfront effort, but ensures that your API remains adaptable and scalable over time. Plus, it provides a clean separation between different versions of your resources.
That sounds like a solid approach for handling versioning in a sophisticated manner.
Absolutely. Content negotiation with media types offers a powerful way to manage API versions while keeping your architecture clean and flexible.